Would you imagine with me that you are a first century Israelite? Let's say you live in Capernaum by the Sea of Galilee, which is a militarized zone, which means that when you walk through the streets of your town, you see Roman soldiers there. They invaded 70 years ago now, and ever since then, your people have been crushed under the weight of heavy taxation. Wealthy Romans are coming in and buying up lands from your family and friends. The tangible effects of the oppression of the Roman Empire, the psychological and physical toll it's taking on your people is everywhere around you. And it's creating tension. You might know people you went to school with, neighbors of yours, who have decided to join groups like the Zealots, an insurgent group that's using guerrilla warfare tactics against the Romans to fight back. And think about the fact that the Hebrew Bible that you have been hearing read in synagogue every week since you were a child tells you that the prophets foretell that one day there will be a Messiah who will be king over the whole world and usher in a kingdom of peace and joy and love and goodness, and how much you would yearn for God to hurry up and fulfill his promises. When is this Messiah going to show up? And one day, this rabbi named Jesus of Nazareth comes into your town. You go to listen to him speak on the hillside by the Sea of Galilee, and he starts to preach a pretty excellent sermon about the ways that lead to the good life. Until he says this: "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do that? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do that? You therefore must be complete as your Father is complete." Think about how radical and audacious that would be as an Israelite. Because your enemy, or at least one on your list, would be the Romans. Think of how audacious it is for Jesus to tell these Israelites, facing the oppression of the Roman Empire, that they should love their enemies. If there's a more radical teaching of Jesus, I cannot think of it. But you and I aren't first century Israelites. And I don't want this to be a lofty ideal for us that, we close our Bibles at the end of this video and don't actually consider what it looks like to live it out in our context. So put yourself on the hillside. If you were listening to Jesus tell you that you should love your enemies, who would he be talking to you about? Who's a person that you disagree with, that you dislike, that you keep rubbing up against in conflict, that has hurt you? You think they're toxic. Maybe they're in your personal life, or maybe they're out in the world. If Jesus were speaking to you, who would he be speaking to you about? And what might it look like to love them? This word that Jesus is using, agape, means to seek the well-being of another even if it costs you. What might it look like to seek the well-being of this person, even if it costs you something? If you need a really practical example, Jesus gives us one. It's very easy. You could implement it today. And it's praying for your enemies. What if you took 2 minutes after you finished this video to pray for this person that you're thinking about in your mind? Pray for their well-being. Jesus asks us to do this for a reason. And he tells us here at the end. It's because loving our enemies will make us more complete like our Father in heaven. It will actually lead us to spiritual maturity. And that sounds pretty upside down to me. I don't know about you, because I think so often it's easy for us to think about these enemies, these people in our lives that are hard to deal with, difficult to love, and think, man, I would be so much more Christ-like if they weren't in my life. Right? It'd be so much easier for me to behave in the way of Jesus, to follow his ways, to be loving like Jesus is, if this person didn't work in my office, if I weren't dealing with this relational conflict with my family member, if these people weren't out in the world that I disagree with. Wouldn't it be so easy to be loving if I didn't have to deal with them? I think Jesus wants to flip that idea of ours on its head and suggest to us that the opposite is true. That actually the presence of an enemy in your life is not a roadblock on your way to spiritual maturity. But that the presence of an enemy in your life is actually a divine invitation to be formed into the image of God, into a person of greater love and generosity and mercy and kindness and peace. Isn't that the opposite of what we would assume? That this enemy in our life is a stumbling block that's in the way of us and the person God created us to be. But that Jesus actually says that by you trying to love your enemy, in the process of you working out what that means, the Holy Spirit, God within you, will be working to transform you more and more into somebody who looks like Jesus and talks like Jesus and acts like Jesus, who is a vessel of the unrestrained love of God for those who are unworthy of it. And I don't know about you, loving my enemies sounds really hard and not always very appealing, but I deeply want to be a person of love. So what do you think about that today? Who is your enemy? Who would Jesus be talking to you about if you were on that hillside? What might it look like to love them? And if Jesus really thinks that this is the way for us to be formed into the image of love, could you take one step today, this week, towards living this out? Take care, friends.